Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today is the final video in our editing series. So we've been talking about how to edit a book for the past month. We talked about assessing your manuscript, we talked about doing the content and developmental edit, the line edit, and getting feedback. Now it's time for the final stage, working with a professional editor. You've done all this work, you might be like, my book is in top shape, right? Well, there's one thing left, and it's to get the feedback from a professional. Working with a professional editor is a necessary step for anyone looking to self-publish and an optional step for anyone looking to traditionally publish. If you plan to traditionally publish and you don't feel confident in the quality of your manuscript, you can certainly hire a professional editor, work with them to really fix up your manuscript before you query it, but it's not a necessary step because you will work with an editor through your publisher. If you're self-publishing, of course you're managing everything yourself, which means that the editing that would normally happen through a publishing house, you need to organize to happen yourself, which means hiring a professional. So when should you work with an editor? First is when you've done as much work on the book as you can yourself, and second is when you've already gotten feedback from other non-professionals. If you hire an editor when there are already issues you know you can fix, you're basically paying that editor to find problems you already know the book has. Your editing costs will probably go up because the book will need more rounds of editing. So do as much work as you can first to decrease your editing costs. An editor is probably going to be the last person you work with. Work with critique partners first because you aren't paying your critique partners. So if you work with them on a messier draft, there's no extra cost to you. Since editing is a paid service and it can be a significant cost, leave it until the manuscript is as polished as you can make it, so the professional is seeing and editing the most developed version of your manuscript. You want their eyes as a professional to see the version that is as close to the final version as possible, so they're giving feedback on the most polished product possible. So how do you choose an editor? First, you need to know the different types of editing. First is the developmental edit. So of course we talked about developmental editing your own manuscript. This is also an important thing to do with a professional. This is content editing that focuses on big picture issues like character, plot, structure, pacing. A developmental editor will give you an editorial report with an assessment of what's working and not working in your manuscript, a breakdown of issues in specific chapters, as well as a marked up copy with suggestions on the line. They're not going to line edit the book, so they're not going to fix every sentence, fix every typo, but they will leave suggestions in the manuscript based on those big picture edits. So if they see a place where there's some excessive telling or where there's a plot hole, they'll note that down. This is usually the first step in the editing process. The next step of editing is an editorial assessment. You can see this as developmental editing light. If your manuscript isn't ready for a developmental edit, but you don't know what to do with it, and you feel like you need help from a professional, maybe you don't have critique partners you can work with, editorial assessment is a great option. You won't get an annotated manuscript, just an edit editor focusing on the broad issues. This is better for authors earlier in the process. If you don't know how to proceed, you can get an editorial assessment. If you're late in the process, you've done all the work that you can do, then you would want to go for the developmental edit instead. Next up is copy editing. This is editing that focuses on the line level, focusing on clarity, coherency, consistency, and correctness. So copy editors will mark up the manuscript with suggestions and corrections on the spelling, grammar, punctuation, capitalization, word choice, dialogue formatting, numeral formatting, point of view, tense issues, and inconsistencies. Also focusing on the line level, but even more particular, there's proofreading. Proofreaders comb your manuscript methodically to find any final errors in spelling, grammar, punctuation, and formatting. Basically, they're looking at the book with a microscope to make sure that not a single comma is out of place. If you're not clear on the difference between copy editing or proofreading, I'll leave a link to our blog post below that explains the differences between these two types of editing and why they're both important when at first glance they might seem like they accomplish similar issues. Finally, there's fact-checking, which is not always applicable. For highly factual books, especially non-fiction ones, you may need a fact-checker to go through and make sure that everything is correct. If you're looking for fact-checkers on the Reedsy marketplace, there's not a specific category for fact-checkers, so you can find them by filtering for copy editors. So editing should be done in this order. An editorial assessment if you choose to get one, those are optional, then developmental editing, then copy editing, then proofreading and fact checking. So how do you pick an editor? First is genre. Not all editors focus on all genres, and you want an editor who specializes in your genre. Different genres have different requirements, and you'll get the most out of an edit if you're working with an editor who has a knowledge of the genre that you're writing in. Next is the type of edit. Some editors will offer a package, say developmental editing and copy editing, or you might hire different editors for each stage of the process. However, of course, if you're starting at the beginning, you're going to need to start by looking for someone who can do a developmental edit. You can also get them to do a sample edit. Now, not all editors offer a sample edit. For some, you can hire them to do a small sample edit of just a small section of your work, and then you'll be able to see if their editing style works for you. You know, do you want an editor who comes up with solutions, or do you just want an editor who identifies issues and leaves you to think of solutions yourself? Do you want someone who's more straightforward and a bit more blunt, or someone who is a bit gentler with how they present their feedback? Of course, not all editors offer sample edits, so if you're interested in an editor who doesn't, you can ask them questions or just look at testimonials and reviews to see if their editing style would be a good fit for you. You also want to consider their level of experience. Obviously, you're going to pay more for a more experienced editor, but there is a middle ground. Remember that a lot of not very qualified people will just start an editing business, list themselves on Fiverr, offering editing services for an extra buck. Finding the cheapest editor you can find who barely has any editing experience and is like a high school senior may not be your best option. If you are on more of a budget, you can hire someone who is newer to the industry, but you still want to hire someone with good testimonials, good reviews, and who knows what they're doing. Editing is not a skill that just anyone can do at equal capacity. It is a learned practice skill that not just anyone can do. And finally, of course, testimonials and recommendations. If you know someone who's worked with a specific editor and you want to work with them, it is always great to be able to get that direct personal recommendation from someone. Now let's talk about costs. Editing is something that you may need to budget for, you may need to save for. It's not a cheap service because it's quite a labor-intensive one. Editing a book takes a lot of work, takes a lot of skill to do well, so naturally it can be a pretty significant investment. So for a developmental edit, this will be the most expensive part. You'll be looking at around $7 per page. For a copy edit, you'll be looking at around $5 per page, and for a proofread, you'll be looking at around $3 per page. When you've identified some good options, then it's time to pitch the editors. Contact them to see if they're a good fit. Provide them a synopsis of your project, as well as an excerpt, usually the first chapter. Explain what type of edit you're looking for, you know, developmental, copy editing. Are there specific issues you feel you need help with? The working title and the genre, of course, so they can assess whether this is a good fit for them. The length and your estimated timeline. Is there a deadline? Is there a date you need the book's edit to be done by? Editors want to take on projects that genuinely excite them, so even though you are hiring them, you do need to sell yourself and your book a little bit. If you're hiring an editor through the Reedsy marketplace, there's a form that you can fill out and you can contact up to 5 editors at once. If you're not hiring an editor through us, then contact them through the contact info that they provide on their website. Probably it'll be an email address, but some might have a contact form. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask them for a quote on the cost. Ask them what you think their timeline will be. When will they start? When will they have edits for you? Do they edit electronically or a hard copy? Most editors will be editing electronically. Do they talk through edits over a call with their clients? A couple years ago, I worked with a professional editor, and we do have some videos on this channel where I talk about my experience with that, what the process was like, and what I learned. So if you're interested in that, I will leave a link to those videos in the description. Hopefully through this process, you're going to end up hiring an editor who's excited to work with you. If you've done all the work leading up to this point, your manuscript should be pretty strong, and this is going to kind of help you take it to the next level, so it will either be ready to publish or to start querying. So you have edited a book. Congratulations. This is no simple feat. Editing can be a really long process. I've heard writers say that editing usually takes them anywhere from half as long as it takes to draft the book to twice as long, depending on their drafting habits. This is no quick process, but it is going to be a really rewarding process to see your book starting to take shape, starting to become stronger, and starting to see your vision really clarify. It can be overwhelming at times, it can be exhausting at times. You will probably want to throw your laptop at the wall at least one point, but the more you work on it, the easier it will be as you start to see your book like taking shape and reaching its final form. So it's going to be very rewarding, I promise. It gets easier the more you do it. Since this entire series is now posted, you can review all of it in the playlist that I will leave linked in the cards. The entire series is also linked in the description, as well as some other resources that I mentioned throughout the video. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled content next week, so turn on your notifications and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos from us. Until next time.